Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today we have with us Dr. Sarah Wittry. We are going to be hearing a bit of a story of her journey. So welcome. I'm going to let you introduce yourself to us.
All right. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I am Sarah Wittry, and I am a wife and mom to 4 kids. We live in Columbus, Ohio, and I practice hospice and palliative medicine full-time currently, and also recently became a certified life coach.
Wow. Okay. We'll get to the reasons why you might have started that journey too. Tell us about your journey of medicine. What has it been like for you?
Sure. So I kind of took a roundabout way, I would say, to get to hospice and palliative. I think, I'd always been interested in medicine, but thought I was going to go into like a pediatric field and like a subspecialty. So I did a lot of work in college with like research and clinical work with pediatric hemonc, and did some summers at St. Jude in Memphis, and I really liked it. But then, I've always been a little bit of a self-development junkie, if you will. And so I did some inner work even back then and kind of came to the conclusion that, I really loved kids, but like it was really hard for me to separate like the tragedy and like loss of children and dying children from kind of my own life outside of medicine. So, long story short, led me away from pediatrics and toward I ended up doing PM&R, physical med and rehab, and I did my training in at the University of Washington in Seattle. And since it was just such a big academic place with like just amazing people and teams, I interacted quite frequently with the palliative care team there, and that was like the first time I had really had exposure to their role. And I basically right away thought, this is perfect. This is for me. I think in another world, I would have been like a psychologist because I love like learning about people and everything going on outside of just, what they're there for and kind of what medical issues are going on. So, yeah, it's been a journey, and like moving from Seattle to Ohio, like 6 months before the pandemic started, was an adventure. And I know that, it's hard to imagine like what would have happened without, but it certainly then kind of threw me into the depths of palliative medicine during that time.
Wow, interesting. And you've had 4 kids along the way. So how did you fit all of that in amongst everything else going on?
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. I'll try to give you a condensed version because it's not a typical one. Always loved kids, like I said. Had, sort of how in medicine or a lot of people that identify as like very much a planning person, have everything planned out. I did too, but then we were like gonna start having babies in 3rd year of residency, and then I experienced like infertility, and that was threw a wrench in our plans, and then, we decided to become foster parents after a long
Mhm,
journey, and so our first child came to us through foster care
mhm,
as an infant, and now he's 7. We got to adopt him when he was 1. Then we
mhm.
also had kind of a surprise biologic baby in fellowship, so that was number 2.
Yeah,
Um, and then we fostered and adopted a girl, our daughter, she came to us at age 6, a kindergartner.
yeah.
She's 11 now. And then our last baby, she is born of the miracle of IVF. And she's almost 2. So we have 4, but like not in a traditional role or kind of how they're
Yeah.
blended together, but they're wonderful.
I love that. Though it sounds busy. And so you're
Mhm.
in fellowship and you're fostering. Tell me about that. How does that work together?
It wasn't easy for sure. I think that I, it's like hard to in the moment know what you're really like going through. It just felt like the right thing for us to do at that time and kind of delve into. So I feel like we just kind of figured out how to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, it's always like, oh, I'm not quite sure what was going on, or how we get through it day to day.
Yeah. And in your medicine, so at that time you were what, doing the rehabilitation medicine, is that right? Is that where you were at that
Mhm,
time? Yeah. So
mhm.
what were the like hours of work like and how much were you having to do when you got home? Like what does that kind of balance look like when you're in there?
Yeah. So I think that that's a good question. I remember it being very overwhelming in a sense of like I knew it could be all consuming, like residency training, fellowship, and then, looking at a lot of my attendings, I was like, oh, they live here too, like they are being here really, really
They're still
late.
here.
Like, yeah, I'm not sure how much better it's gonna get. So I remember early on deciding like I needed to figure out some ways to be efficient, more efficient for myself. And maybe more importantly, like for me, is narrowing down my focus so that I didn't want my whole identity and like all of my time and energy to be spent in medicine. But certainly I felt like I was going against the expectation maybe at that point, right? Because like you were thought of as being a better resident if you were spending more hours there and if you were like the ones that were staying the latest. And so there's a lot of like guilt and questioning myself about that. But it's like I knew I needed boundaries. I just don't think I had like the language for it at that time. But I knew it was like not going to jive long term.
Yeah, it sounds like you developed that insight pretty early if you were doing pediatric heme-oncology and said, I can't not take these patients home with me,
Mhm.
not literally, but in my brain. I can't,
Yeah.
despite trying, I cannot separate my day from my evenings and weekends. So I
Hmm.
cannot stay here. That's not good for me long term. And then I'm in rehab and
Hmm.
I'm seeing my attendings are still here long hours and I'm expected to be here long hours, but I cannot make that work. That is not going to
Hmm.
be me long term. What were some of the steps you did to try and improve your efficiency then so you could get out of there faster?
Mm. What did I do? I mean, things like templates and sort of figuring out the flow, like experimenting with like the flow of my day, so that I could kind of um, anticipate sort of what times I would be needed to, round versus what blocks I would have to like work on notes, and just try
Mm-hmm.
to do as much of the um, anything I could figure out I could kind of automate, I would try to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say like mm, sort of I don't want to say lowering my expectations because that sounds kind of like challenging, right? Or like you don't really want to say that in terms of like patient care, but like lowering my own expectations of myself for like every single thing I needed to include in my note. And like just kind of coming to the realization that that was not always necessary and it wasn't gonna get me out on time. I was doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think that lesson early is almost, like you said, different from how everyone else was doing it. You're almost leading the way. You're like, hey guys, it's possible to get out of here faster. And here's the things I'm going to try doing to get myself home. I wonder if any of them are watching you thinking, how does she do that? What do you think?
Hmm. I know I remember people saying like you're really efficient, and my husband would tell me that too, like in studying and stuff. He'd be like, "You're just really efficient," Um, but I don't know. The experience I remember having in residency is that I, felt like I was being judged if I would like be the first one out. You know what I mean? Even if I had like everything done, I still like, even if they never said it, I felt like
Yeah.
there was.
So they may have been jealous of you, but internally you're still self-doubting yourself, but you're getting out of there anyway. You're like, this
Yes,
doesn't feel like it should be okay, but dang it, I did it and I'm going home.
totally. Yes.
I love this. It's so much fun. Okay, so they got little people at home, and at some point you transition. Now, so when do you decide that palliative care is where you want to be?
I think knowing that, mm, I would say the more experience I had in the medical world, right, and just kind of a healthcare system in the US, the more empathy I developed for people trying to navigate it, and just how there were so many barriers to even people that were very well resourced to kind of like figuring out where they need to go and what they need to do. And then that becomes kind of, that experience on steroids for people who have like life limiting conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think so it was like some of that of just wanting to like serve as somewhat of a guide or like some people call it palliative, like a medical interpreter, kind of like breaking stuff down and like putting pieces together, connections for people because they have like multiple specialists and different opinions, and they can get a lot of different messages from medical teams. And so I found that to be like a really rewarding skill to kind of like break it down over and over for patients and families. Um, and then like creating like space for them to be able to be authentic and have that sense of like psychological safety to just like be real and have that human connection, like um, about, you know, what was expected in terms of prognosis and like just finding over and over that people would, understandably want to avoid talking about that or talking about dying. And it was just something I felt like was a bit of a void and where I thought it's uncomfortable, but like I want to be able to hold that space for people because obviously like people are going to die whether we want them to or not, or like it's part of all of our experience. And so kind of being able to see like the role of palliative being helping guide people through it in a way with less like distress, and obviously with like symptom management and things like that are really they're really gratifying, or like there's a lot of meaning in them. But I'd say more than anything it's like the relational aspect and making it suck less.
Mm-hmm. I find that really powerful that it was a very important skill that you had, and you obviously found satisfaction in doing that,
Hmm.
even though it's kind of moving you towards what you had run away from originally, which was now I am going to have the inevitable experience of patients dying more frequently in palliative care, but there's a new sense of purpose in the middle. Is that what you think
Mm.
that was became enticing about it or acceptable about it?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it that way, to be honest, that it was kind of like tying back in. But I think that is makes a lot of sense.
When you're in pediatric hem-oncology, your desire is that your people win and survive.
Hmm.
Then
Yes.
you have the expectation that, oh, they're not all winning and they're not all surviving, and I can't separate that. And then you come
Yes.
kind of full circle saying, well, actually, there's some satisfaction in there, even when we can't succeed. If success is the ultimate goal, which it isn't, okay, interesting. Now that we've
Hmm.
decided that that isn't the goal, I can still be useful and purposeful and satisfied in my role. The reason I'm interested in that is I do
Yeah.
still look after and have had many oncologists and hem-oncologists conversations with them about that struggle with, but our job is to be successful. I'm like, and so that heartbreak if it's not successful, I'm like, no, human bodies do what human bodies do. Sometimes we have the technology in the right time and the right place to be able to help them live longer or have quality of life. but you did not create this disease. And so
Right.
therefore that internal burden is so,
Mm,
when we can kind of separate out what's happening for a patient versus who you are within this relationship as their physician. So
totally.
important, because when we're trying to combine, I'm a good doctor because that my patients survive, that's not going to work for us for very long.
No,
No.
no, absolutely. And I think when you were saying, we want to be successful, I think that's like a paradigm shift that I obviously like encourage, but it's hard for people. But it's a good thing to think about is like, how do we define success, like in the medical field in general, and then like specialty specific, right? Is it like connecting with our patients and having them feel safe and heard, or is it like because when we do tie it to things like survival or rehospitalization rates and stuff, like we probably can't win. We really
Isn't, well,
can't.
it's nothing to do with you often.
Yeah,
Like, you have
yeah.
always done your best or had the very best of intentions.
Hmm.
And human bodies are human bodies, and medical conditions are medical conditions, and it was not within your abilities to have any impact on that with what we have
Right.
right now, right? Uh,
Totally.
yeah, so interesting. Okay, so here you are finding satisfaction and meaning in communicating, coordinating family progress through navigating this palliative care experience. And then what happens next? How does
Mm,
that, is that an easy
so
thing to do in the clinical hours, or does that sort of kind of spew into taking phone calls on Saturday
yeah.
mornings because they haven't been able to get to their appointments? Like, what is happening?
Right. Right. It's like I don't know. I suppose that part of me, since I've always known, is really important to me to not have it like to have it like defined, in a
Hmm.
part of my life. Um, that I made choices along the way to try to keep that way.
Hmm.
But certainly like where I'm at even now, we have, weekend rounding and we're on call a fair amount. And there's not like you don't have to go in and admit someone, but it's a lot of questions on like ICU symptom management or like family distress. What do we do at 3 a.m.? So it's a lot of like guidance. But I think from like a work-life balance perspective, it's not the worst thing. I would say though that, the emotional toll, uh, I think to be sustainable in the field, um, people need to like proactively work on their wellness, because for a long time when hospice and palliative was like a newer field, a newer specialty, there's a lot of times people, physicians who are at sort of like the latter half or latter little bit of their career, and they had done whatever, and then they wanted to like ICU docs and HEMONC and just those types of people that interacted a lot with the transition to end of life, but they were so it's like they kind of wanted that to still have that role, and I don't know, a different part of medicine, but a lot of them only were in it for like 5 years. And
Mm.
so it's interesting now we have more, people that come out right away out of training and do it. And the research is not amazingly strong that it's like a super sustainable field just because they're, even if it's not necessarily you're doing charting at home, maybe you've navigated around that and you can get all your work done. It's like the emotional toll is hard to just clock out of. You know what I mean? And like who you think about and kind of how the conversations you have and kind of the relationships you witness and some of that, I think um it really is impactful. And then you also, it shapes a lot of perspectives for me. And I imagine a lot of people in the field in terms of like how you see your own relationships and your own life and kind of the big picture and all this like kind of
Mhm.
existential stuff, right? So it's a little bit hard to get away from in that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So then what are some of you said you're into self-help from a long time ago. What are some of the things you
Mhm.
have done to guide yourself and your well-being and sustainability within this career?
Yes. So I'd say that for a very long time, I was a consumer of all information. Okay. So I would like
Yeah.
read constantly, take in like all sorts of podcasts, and and I would find it to be just really helpful. And like when I was like bringing it all in, and I think there was just this constant sense of like overwhelm, right? Of like, well, maybe if I learn enough, I'll be like, my life will feel a little bit less hectic, right? Or like I'll have more capacity. But I found that it was probably the opposite at some point, although it's difficult to define what that balance was. But it was like I knew all the information or a lot of information. But what I was missing for quite a while was like a implementation like into my life and like my actual um, how I was feeling and experiencing things like on a day-to-day basis, right? And so it's like kind of in that chronic, like activated state of just like buzzy and trying to just like knock it out, be efficient, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And it just, yeah, I would say like during the pandemic and work was really nuts, and then kids were home from school, like it all kind of, I could sense again that like it wasn't gonna work. It was the wheels were gonna fall off, you know? And
So,
so
yeah.
um yeah, so I think like that's when I kind of got into learning about coaching and like learning from physician coaches, through like podcasts or like Facebook groups and all sorts of things like that. And so that's where I think I got into like the mindset piece and like the idea about like the thoughts we have, driving like our feelings and all that, and then kind of what we do. Um, and a big aha that I have and still have is just like the idea of like we assume it's like fact of like I don't have time, there's not enough time, and that being like, well, that's a thought, it's a belief, right? And it's like it led me to just chronically feeling like that sense of like time inadequacy or time scarcity.
Mhm.
And like I was racing against the clock every day. And that was exhausting. And so I think just like having that epiphany and just like realizing that I can view things just slightly differently helped a ton. And then more recently, I'd say my growth has been in kind of tapping more into like things in my body, like how I feel in my current state and my emotional health and stuff like that, and just doing more like frequent check-ins with myself. And then based on that, like if I'm able to get still enough for a few minutes, which sounds crazy, but it is hard to do. If it's not a natural habit, then from there I can see kind of sense where I'm at and like knowing what I need to sort of shift a little bit out. Or sometimes it's okay to be like, I'm here, I'm feeling like really overwhelmed, and that makes sense. And like offering that compassion for myself has been really helpful too, like as a practice. It's not natural.
Yeah. When you were in that space of, I don't have time for this, I don't have time, what didn't you have time for? So, what was being left off your plate that you thought you
Mhm.
did not have time for, do you think?
That's a good question. I want to say it was like time to, how I told you I did all the intake or input of information, and it's like it was just all in my brain, like spinning around, and I felt like I didn't have time to process it and like implement it into actual real life. I mean, I don't know if I would have named it as that, but like that was the constant thing of like, I'm learning. I'm supposed to do this journal exercise. I'm supposed to do that, crap, I don't have time and I'm tired and I have to sleep.
Okay, so
And
we've
like,
got busy full-time, or I don't know how many hours per week you're working in
mhm,
your day job. You've got 4 kids at home. You're in the middle of a pandemic. You're kind of
mhm,
learning. Where do you do your learning, your podcast listening and things? Is that like on the way to and from work? Is that kind of where you are doing
mhm,
it? Okay, so you're listening to podcasts
yeah,
on the way to and from work, and you have this expectation on yourself that what would really help is if I could put some of this into practice, but I don't have time. And then you feel constantly through your day like you are running from thing to thing to thing to thing. Okay, so most of
mhm,
us would probably decide for you that 4 kids and a job is plenty of things. Um,
right.
but you had decided what I think I need, what I really would like to do, that would be a me thing, despite 4 children and a job, would be to kind of slow down and implement some of this, and then I might feel better than I do right now,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have time. And then he
Yes.
said, and then he said, but I want to, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe I don't have time is just what I'm telling myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it created time for you to implement some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool, right? Because you still have a job and you still have 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
When did you fit in implementation? Like, what did that look like initially? The implement.
Mm-hmm. So I joined a coaching group, that I would say kind of like kickstarted all of this, you know. Uh, and her name is Heather Chauvin. She hosts a podcast called Emotionally Uncomfortable. The group she has is called Mastery. And it's like she specifically works with, you know, women who are raising kids and who are like high achievers, kind of like,
Mhm,
I mean, it was a perfect fit, but it was not like medicine centric, right? Like most
mhm,
people were
mhm,
doing all sorts of other things. Um, and I think that I joined thinking like I'm going to get some strategy, right, of
mhm.
like how to do this.
Yeah.
And she really just challenged us a ton, and me personally, and like you have to, you can't go around, like you just got to go through, you got to be in it. It's not like a finish line. There's not like a, you do these 12 steps and then you get to this like existence of like everything's smooth sailing. But like if
Mhm.
you learn the tools of like getting in touch with like your energetic emotions, that kind of thing, that like truly will help you to know what you want and be like really clear on what you want. And so it's like, I don't know, I got a lot of permission from her and like opened up my world of, what's possible. And also just, yeah, like watching people go through the process and kind of in awe a lot of like, people do this, like, but that's not like what's expected. Or like, she'd always be like, she taught this concept of like energetic time management instead of just like the traditional planning out your week in a calendar. And she
Mhm.
was like, the first bucket of your things, like, kids, family, work, etc. She's like, it always has to be myself. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. And then like she would just show us, over and over, like those are your top 3 things for yourself. You put those first. And
Mhm.
just really like shifted my idea of like being self-sacrificing as like a mom and then doctor, and being like, it's not selfish for me to, do my yoga, do my reading, like get my sleep. That's actually like, yeah, going to be the most helpful for me to like be a human and have an identity outside of all my roles.
Got it. What was the time commitment to be within that coaching group at the beginning? Do you know? Was it like once a week or?
Yeah, there was like an hour call a week, and then it was just like check-ins, and some like modules and stuff we were supposed to do and talk about. We had like there's a lot of accountability in it too. So that was
Mhm.
another thing I think that helped me with implementing was I'd be like, oh, this is a great plan. And then they would be like, okay, when are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? And it was, it, I guess it was that piece that sort of got me out of my like comfort zone and same old excuses and, like in a, gentle way, but like not actually that gentle always.
Do you think anything suffered when you had started this process of saying, I'm going to set aside for myself this 1 hour commitment and a few extra spots for working on my priorities and building new goals? Did anything suffer about your life and your kids and your work?
Um, I want to say there was like a period where it was new to everyone, right? It was
Yeah.
a new experience to tell. Like my husband was very supportive, but I would say, hey, I have a call. I have to not be bothered at these times. And it'd be like in the evening,
Yeah.
And so I think he was supportive, but also like, oh, another one kind of thing. And like the kids, they were just so used to being able to like get me whenever they needed me at home. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so to kind of like teach them, this is, you can't bug mommy this time, it's been hard, but like it's been, I think, a good lesson in modeling. But I would say if anything, it was sort of like that learning curve for the family of like, I'm not available all the time and managing my own guilt around that, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's just because we have coaches here a lot, just because I know a lot of coaches, and a lot of you have changed your lives so significantly because you were busy before, but now you're in your world, but adding these other things in. So it's just kind of interesting to see you as the busy physician and busy mom of four saying, and I'm going to carve out an hour a week for this
Hmm.
thing where I can't be disturbed. And then there's homework. But I want to do this homework. I'm doing this with intention of changing up something else I have a priority for. And it's going to be
Hmm.
uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable. And I didn't enjoy telling husband, don't let the kids in here. And I didn't like that I wasn't there the way I am normally. And I benefited on the other side of it. And I benefited
Hmm.
through it to get permission to
Hmm.
say, if I prioritize me, how does that change up my day and give me something new about my day? And then you said that even within your day, you start showing up differently. So the overwhelm,
Hmm.
you were able to shift a little bit into curiosity. Why am I overwhelmed?
Hmm.
Then you're able to say, what else is available instead of just overwhelm every day?
Yes, yes. That's another practice that I've been working on and finding really powerful is like um just checking in those check-ins, in the beginning of the day or a week or even like, an hour at work or something when it's just you're feeling a lot. Of being like, hey, like here's where I am and be like, how do I want to feel? Like, how do I want to feel? And then what can I do to like show myself I have my back on that? So it's like I used to think it was ridiculous to, think about going outside in the middle of the day and like taking a 10-minute walk. And now I give myself permission if I need to do that, and I need to like kind of reground myself or like get away from drama and like chaos and like urgency. And I mean, I would say 99% of the time, like I feel very free and I feel like empowered that I like did it. And then I think it's cool to kind of watch other people be like, oh, because it's like when you're not in that mindset, you're sort of like crazy. Like I wish I had time to do that, but I don't, yeah.
It's super helpful because I think we do get wrapped up in the drama and we feel like it's urgent and important. And if we don't stay within it, we somehow are missing out. But then you're like, if I separate it, I come back and I feel just better.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel as
Totally.
urgent and as important. And I'm still present and doing my job, but without that haste and overwhelm piece to it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I think these are just part of those skills that help us create a sustainable day. That we all have busy workplaces, drama, chaos, urgency, access issues, the things that interruptions, things that happen about our day,
Yeah.
and being able to say, and
Hmm.
take a minute to just separate myself from that, whether it be a walk outside, listen to a favorite song, whatever it
Hmm.
might be. It can just change. So I don't feel quite so about the whole thing.
Hmm. Totally. Totally.
Hmm.
You can like show up differently, and even in the same situation.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So if you've got that physician who's just in the overwhelmed busyness of their day and their kids, and there's no time for them other than their drive to and from work,
Hmm.
what do you think helped you start? What are some of those initial building blocks that could be helpful for someone stuck in the middle, stuck right back in the
Hmm.
crazy?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say like even if you feel like you're alone and it sometimes feels like you're the only one that is like struggling to keep your head above water and like seems like everyone else is put together or like has their crap together, like you're not. And, you know, I think recognizing that and just like sharing with someone can be really healing in its own, even if it's just for that, like, yeah, totally, um, like sharing tiny little strategies or something with each other, and just kind of like feeling more seen, I think can be helpful. Um,
Mm.
and then I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it is like you have to work on the belief that like you as a person outside of like all of the things you have to do and people you have to take care of, like you have to give yourself permission to matter and be on your, to-do list essentially. Um, and just knowing that like it doesn't have to be a huge long thing, right? It doesn't have to be like you have an hour long massage or you work out every morning, every day. Like I think sometimes we kind of build it too big or think that it won't matter if I do 5 minutes a day of like sitting in peace, and just being quiet or listening to music or something. But I think if the more little times that you can do those, like micro moments, um, it like builds so much more capacity in you. And it also just like it shifts your energy and your perspective, right? And so it's like don't discount those things, even if they seem too small or like out of reach, insignificant. Like I think start with something and then see how it goes and just keep trying till you find something that feels feels good, like just for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. I think you were onto something when you said that you found a community of other mums who were not in medicine, and that interest in what they're doing, seeing what they can craft within their life to show you that it's possible to do something
Mhm.
different within your crazy busy life too, and permission to try doing things a little differently. Like this is you who's always looked for the possibility in doing differently. And then you got to a point that it's like, oh, what if I added a community because I'm not getting anywhere alone? That I think that probably brought another level up for you. Hey.
Totally, totally. Because my team is like amazing and I love them, but they were just in it, right? With the mostly frustrations and like we could we could talk all day, but it would mostly be like negative spiraling energy
Whining.
with no sort of like silver lining or like even just solution focused at all. Like it's just like it sucks. It still sucks.
Yeah.
And I'm all about that, right? Like talking it through and like trying to figure out solutions, but it's like it does kind of suck you down after a while when you're like realizing that, if you just continue in the same pattern with the same people, like you're not going to see things different, but you're just going to get more like depressed about everything.
Yeah. So it brought up your perspective just by seeing people doing things from a different perspective within a community that was supportive and helping you want to kind of work on new things. I love this. So
Mhm.
important. I think connection, we know connection is so helpful for, reducing some of the trauma of medicine, and some of the improving sustainability in medicine is having your community or being connected to others and not being alone, because being alone is so
Mm.
terribly hard. And you are
Mhm.
not alone. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Sarah, thank you for this conversation. Where can people find you if they're interested in kind of what you're doing?
Sure. So I have a podcast. It's called Vibrant Humans. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess I'm on Instagram at Sarah Ann Wittry.
Mhm.
Um, I have a Facebook group, like a community is Vibrant Humans as well.
Nice.
And then I've been on LinkedIn more, so it's just my name, Sarah Wittry, and just have really enjoyed like connecting with, physician moms and other people around the world who are interested in wellness and sustainability, and just kind of like carving slash creating lives that we want, and not feeling like basically doing so unapologetically, right?
Mhm. Yeah, love
Mhm.
it. All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Thank you so much again, Sarah, for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.